Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. Today's Wednesday before the Vuelta starts on Friday, so we got to talk about the Tour of Spain, of course. Now, when I woke up, jumped on the couch, flipped open the Cycling News website, I see it's Nairo Quintana disqualified from his Tour de France results. He had fantastic rides on Planche de Belfi and then a really big ride on stage 11 when he finished second to Jonas Vingegaard, who won the stage and took over the race leader's jersey on that magnificent Col de Grenan final attack on stage 11. Nairo Quintana was the first of the GC favorites to throw in the big attack on that day and then finish second on the stage to Jonas Vingegaard. But with his positive test for tramadol, he loses his results of the Tour de France, but is able to start still at the Tour of Spain. Now, this is kind of a strange scenario here because it's on the banned list for the UCI Union Cyclists International, but it's not on the World Anti-Doping list. So, what is tramadol? Tramadol is a pain reliever pill. I have some here. And what this does, I don't consider it performance enhancing, but will it affect your performance at the end of the day? You have to say yes. But I kind of put it on that same category as I would say like Ambien. If you can't sleep for 3 nights in a row, but you take a sleeping pill and then instead of not getting sleep for 4 nights in a row, you're able to get good sleep and then you're able to get a good result. But does it really change who you are? Is it a performance enhancing drug? I don't put it on as that list of drugs when you're talking about EPO, blood doping, and those kind of things that can actually change a person's physique and make them go faster than they could. But could tramadol have an effect on your performances on that day? Certainly they could. I can give you a story from 2009 when I was doing the Tour of California. Stage 1, I liked the race up and split it down to about a group of 15, 20 riders. We come into the finish. Mancebo ends up winning the stage. He was solo on the stage, but we did enough to protect as Radio Shack to give Levi Leipheimer and Lance Armstrong a shot at winning that year's Tour of California. Now, I had 0 tramadol in my system when Tour of California started. Stage 3 came into effect, and I crashed, and I hit my knee incredibly hard. Immediately, I knew I had to go back to the race doctor, and when I did, that's what they give you back there in 2009 was tramadol. Without the tramadol, am I able to finish the race? Possibly, but the amount of pain I was in, probably I would have been watching Tour of California from the couch. Now, here's the thing. When we're talking about it being performance enhancing or not performance enhancing, when I go further in the Tour of California, I was on tramadol from every stage, from stage 3 when I crashed, that moment, all the way into the finish of the last stage of Tour of California. And as each stage had passed, I had actually gotten worse and worse and worse. And then on the last stage, when we went up Mount Palomar, I ended up getting dropped, losing 8.5 minutes on that stage. Now, when we're talking about a painkiller, what's happening when you take a painkiller? A lot of people think that you take the painkiller and it went straight to my knee that day and it relieved the pain, but that's not what it's actually doing. It's going through the whole body and it's numbing everything in the body. And so when you're taking it progressively throughout day by day by day, it's certainly not a performance enhancing drug in any way possible. In fact, I see it as a de-performance for sure when we start looking at the results from that 2009 Tour of California where it was taking form away from me. But you got to remember, if I wasn't taking the tramadol, I would have been on the couch and probably watching the Tour of California instead of still in the race. Now, at that point in time in 2009 and every day throughout my career, tramadol was legal and it was something that you could take openly amongst the team, amongst the peloton. Everybody was capable. It was legal 100% and allowed, much like Ambien was. Now, I'll give you another example of tramadol, and that's why I still have the prescription with me here at 51, almost 51 years of age. I'll turn 51 in October. Earlier at the Tour de France, when I'm covering it for NBC and I'm bringing the butterfly effect to you guys at home, there's a lot of lack of sleep happening throughout that 3 weeks of this year's Tour de France. And when you have to add in the 3:30 a.m. wake up, the stress of working for NBC all the way till noon, coming back, doing the butterfly for you guys. I remember we were 2 weeks into the Tour de France and my back was really bad at that moment. And I'd taken the tramadol even before I'd come up and shot the video for you fans to watch the butterfly effect. So in my mind, do I consider it a banned substance? I don't think it should be. It should be off. But of course, cycling, because of all the effects from the early years of cycling all the way through the early 2000s, then of course the sport is starting to get a lot cleaner when you're talking about going from 2010 and all the way up to the years now. You're starting to see a whole different peloton out there of riding. But when we look up and you wake up this morning, you see the results of Nairo Quintana losing his Tour de France. It's going to bring back those old memories of the old days. But let me tell you, when I'm talking about tramadol, will it affect your performance? Certainly it can have an effect on your performance, but I don't think it's a performance-enhancing drug, so I shouldn't think that it would be on the list for Union Cyclists International to be listed up there. And in my mind, it should have been off the list and always kept off the list because, of course, as professional athletes, just like you guys getting ready to go into the office, let's say you broke your arm on Monday and you got to go to work on Tuesday. You went into the doctor, they put your arm in a cast. Most likely he gave you a painkiller and you went to work the next day. So I believe when we're talking about professional athletes, there has to be a certain amount of medication that's legally allowed for the athletes to take just so that they can do their normal everyday job of riding their bike and waking up. But when we're talking about performance-enhancing drugs that can turn a rider that normally couldn't do a final climb in 10 minutes and all of a sudden can take a time of 12 minutes, which would have been a best time, and now he's down to 10 minutes, that's a performance-enhancing drug. When I look again at this tramadol, and we're discussing this one specifically because of Nairo Quintana's positive today, when we're talking about that drug, it's not going to change somebody's best and solid time. A rider's always going to be able to go up the climb at the same speed with or without the tramadol, but maybe under the stressful situations of a sore back issue or some kind of scenario like that. That's why I believe a drug like tramadol should be allowed within the sport. But it's always going to be a touch and go. Everyone's going to have their reasons of saying absolutely nothing should be allowed, and people are going to have their belief that, yes, you should be able to go to work next day, whether if it's riding your bike or if it's in the office. And that's the way I take it when I look at Nairo Quintana's positive for the tramadol. Now, let's get into other things that's happening here at the Vuelta a España, because right now on Wednesday, you know the riders have to be getting ready for the team time trial event that's starting on stage 1 here on Friday. Now, Jumbo-Visma and Bora-Hansgrohe posted up videos of the whole team out there on their TT bikes practicing the team time trial. Now, why do you want to do this? This is important time. Remember, throughout all the year, riders are living in different countries and they're coming together just for the races. A lot of times, specifically the big teams, the riders might not see themselves. Jumbo-Visma oftentimes get their riders together for altitude training camps, and other teams do too. So there's maybe some possibility that they've ridden their team time trial bikes together in the correct order that they want to do Friday's event on, or it could be, and most likely is, that the team has come together. There's 2, 3, 4 riders that they haven't seen throughout the year and haven't practiced this discipline. Now, you got to ask yourself, why is it important to practice it 2 days before the team time trial event starts on Friday? The reason why is because if you're behind the wrong rider, you'll get popped off and the team will lose time on Friday's stage. I'll give you an example of 2011 when I was riding for Radio Shack at the Tour de France. They had a team time trial, and I was riding behind Andreas Klöden on the practice day of the team time trial training. I get behind him. Andreas Klöden in 2011 was riding time trials at amazing speeds. And when I was behind him on this day of training, every time he went to the front to take a pull, he was gapping me off. By the time I closed the gap, he was done with his work on the front and pulling off, which was meant that I was spent efforts of basically twice as long on the front, which means my time actually on the front was slowing the team down. When we got to the team bus, I went up to Johan Bernal and I said, Johan, there's no way I can do the team time trial behind Andreas Klöden. He's too fast. Either he has to slow down or you have to change the rotation. Everybody in the bus is like, nah, we can't slow down. We still got to go this speed. I was like, okay, but I can't be behind Andreas Klöden. So they rotated me out, and Dmitry Moriev, the Kazakhstan rider, took my place. Now, when we go up to the stage 3, I believe it was that year's Tour de France, all of a sudden we get into team time trial, and Moriev stays for about 50% of the race and then gets popped off of the back of the Radio Shack train. Get later in the bus, and he's all upset about getting dropped early into the team time trial stage. I turned around and looked at him and said, Dmitry, no one on this team could stay behind Andreas Klöden with the way he's time trial and how fast and how aero he is. He was always going to gap somebody off unless he either changed his technique, slowed the pace down, did a little bit longer pull so you can recover, because every time he accelerated, he was increasing the speed when we're talking about in that 2011 team time trial event. I knew personally, there's no way you wanted to be behind him. So when you're looking at today's practice warm-up stages for stage Friday's team time trial, remember, it's always important for these teams like Bora Hansgrohe, who are racing for general classification, and of course Jumbo-Visma with Primoz Roglic. They have to get the order of rotation spot on so that they can go the fastest as possible. Keep in mind, that's very important. So all the riders right now, they've probably arrived, should have arrived yesterday, probably Tuesday night here at the Vuelta at the hotels, and now Wednesday they're all out there on their team time trial bikes training. Now, one other thing before I go, Bahrain Victorious has listed their 8-rider squad, and I talked about Jack Haig being on the team yesterday and Stefan Williams being on the team. Both those riders are off, and so when we start looking at the 8-rider list here from Bahrain Victorious, they still got a strong team because they have Mikel Landa and Gino Mader. Remember right, on last year's 2021 edition of the Vuelta, it was Gino Mader and Jack Haig who were putting pressure on all the GC guys outside of Primoz Roglic, that is, on last year's Vuelta. But when you have options and numbers at the finish of the races, it does help to having teammates that can be up there on the final climb, throwing in attacks, and allow you to sit back. But one thing about Jack Haig missing that might help Mikel Landa, when you're talking about these first 3 races up here in the Netherlands, we're talking about specifically stage 2 and 3. If there's any problems with Mikel Landa, he'll have 100% of the team that will go back and look after him, versus if you had a Jack Haig there on the team, possibly some guys stay up front and possibly some guys, and only half, 4 or 5 guys go back for Mikel Landa instead of 100% of the team going back there looking after him for their general classification hopes of Mikel Landa trying to win this year's Vuelta a España. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Racing starts on Friday. There's one more Beyond the Coverage effect that'll take place tomorrow, and then we get into the butterfly effect proper. So like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys just about every day from here all the way through to the end of the Vuelta.